righty. Hello and welcome to Beavertail Books on this frigid evening. Before we begin, I want to mention a couple of our many upcoming events that we've got planned. Tomorrow night, in spite of the cold, we are hosting Grant Faulkner, and he's going to talk about his unique novel called Something Out There in the Distance, and that's at 6:30. Then on Monday, Robert Stack will share his book, Silent No Longer, Advancing the Fight for Disability Rights. And you can find all the details about these events and many more that are coming up on our website, or you can sign up for our newsletter. Exvangelical journalist. Oh, I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name.
Hesse.
Hesse. Okay. I meant to do that as soon as you got here.
I'm glad you did. Most of America says Hess.
Yes. Yes.
But in the Midwest, you say Hesse.
I Okay, Josiah Hesse grew up in the stifling working-class town of Mason City, Iowa. Raised in the institutions of fundamentalist Christianity. After escaping Iowa in search of something more, he considered the possibility that God didn't exist, that the world wasn't going to end, and that he was woefully unprepared for a future he'd never believed would arrive. Written in vivid prose, On Fire for God is both an unflinching memoir of religious trauma and survival and a stirring examination of the emotional, political, and sociological effects of the Christian right. Josiah is a freelance journalist out of Denver, Colorado, covering everything from politics, science, and crime to art, pop culture, and evangelical culture and theology. A regular contributor to The Guardian and Vice, his work has appeared in Esquire, Newsweek, Men's Health, and Politico, among other publications. An Iowa native and leading authority on 90s Christian rock, Josiah released his debut novel, Carnality, Dancing on Red Lake, in 2015, and just released his second book in the Carnality series, Carnality, Sebastian Phoenix, and the Dark Star, which was written in part at Owl Farm in Woody Creek, Colorado, the longtime home of Hunter S. Thompson. So please join me in a warm Iowa welcome. Welcome back for Josiah.
Thanks for coming out, everyone. I know it's like crazy cold out there. As cold as Trump's heart. So I appreciate making the trip. And thank you for the introduction. I grew up just a few miles north of here in two towns, Clear Lake and Mason City. Clear Lake being the town that killed Buddy Holly, and Mason City being the birthplace of Music Man, the 1950s musical. And when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of Christian conservative influence in politics. The Reagan years, the Bush senior years, it was a time of prosperity gospel where people were giving large amounts of money to traveling preachers and televangelists like Robert Tilton and Jim Baker. My parents had some small businesses that they were giving as much money to the church as they were taking home at times. Over the course of a decade, it was around $250,000. Meanwhile, we were on food stamps and shopping at thrift stores, and I was preparing for the end of the world, essentially. We believed in the coming rapture, the idea that all believers are going to disappear into the sky. There'll be a tribulation here on earth, four horsemen of the apocalypse, all the imagery from the book of Revelation. And I was very preoccupied with it. I was very preoccupied with sin and salvation. What does it mean to, be invited into heaven, to escape hell? Thought about eternal torture really on an hourly basis as a kid. I mean, if you sincerely believe that eternal torture is at stake, it becomes a pretty high priority in your mind. Consequently, didn't do so well in school. Wasn't too concerned with algebra. If the demon humans are about to jump out of the earth with the heads of lions and the bodies of locusts, and and I was preparing, for eternity, essentially. I mean, I remember being told from a very young age, not just at the church that I was raised in, but also I was attending like Assemblies of God events and Open Bible. I was going to around 9 church events a week. I was always told, like, it's most likely you'll never live to see adulthood, my whole generation. We became pretty focused on the Y2K scare, and when that didn't occur, it was kind of a small crack in my faith that eventually widened as the years progressed. But when I turned 18 around 2001 and flunked out of high school, I really was not prepared for adulthood. Like I said, I was told it would never arrive, and worked a lot of what I would call disposable jobs, minimum wage jobs, factories, construction, retail, restaurants. Eventually worked my way into journalism by my 30s and started reporting on what was happening in the Christian right, which wasn't much like during the Obama years. I kind of thought like my expertise in this subject was something of the past, and people might be interested in it from a historical standpoint, but we all know how that story played out in 2016. And spent a couple of years reporting on politics and culture and the Christian right, and it was around 2022 that I went to this Christian finance conference that was promised people that you'll learn about becoming wealthy, and Tim Tebow spoke there, the Auntie Pretzels lady, I forget what her name is, was there, and it was very much like a mega church service. It was very emotionally driven, and I started seeing people who were genuinely interested in bettering themselves financially, in my estimation, being taken advantage of and being kind of swindled out of a great deal of money and emotionally manipulated in the process. And it made me think a lot about my community back in North Iowa and the struggles that people were having economically. And so I returned to my hometown and started doing a lot of interviews with people, family members, friends, acquaintances, church leaders, former believers, current believers, and also started spending a lot of time immersed in the Music Man, and started seeing a lot of parallels between the story of this guy who goes from town to town, finding whatever is new, and getting people really afraid of it, and then offering himself and this institution of a boys band, something from a previous generation, the wholesome goodness of years past, as the solution. Started seeing so many parallels between that and what was going on with the MAGA revolution, but then also, peeling back the layers of history, thinking about the war on drugs, satanic panic, the backlash to feminism, the Red Scare, all the way back to the KKK of the 20s, the second iteration of the Klan, and found that they had visited my hometown in 1925. They had a big parade, the mayor led them, there was a circus, and they were getting people afraid of evolution being taught in schools, and these people of color that were coming to town, these immigrants that were working in the quarries. Started seeing these parallels with all these generations in the Music Man, and decided to put it down in the book we're all here about tonight. And I think there's something just really unsettling about the way people were blaming themselves for these promises not bearing out. In the Music Man, these kids are signing up for the band under the pretense that they're going to be taught how to play their instruments, right? How to be in a marching band. But this guy, Harold Hill, he doesn't know anything about music. He doesn't know how to play music, and he gets around this by telling them about the think system. Like, if you just imagine yourself playing it, it's going to transpire. You will learn these skills. And started seeing the same thing in prosperity gospel. People are told, like, if they have the right attitude, if they are pure, if they're not sinful, they will be financially wealthy. And so many of them, you know, didn't work out. Obviously, it works out great for the preachers on stage who are, you know, often boasting about their wealth. But people in the congregation were blaming themselves, you know, that they were sinful, that they didn't believe enough, that they were sowing seeds of doubt, as Oral Roberts put it. And, you know, I started seeing the same thing happening with trickle-down economics and how Republican voters, in my estimation, have been swindled into giving tax breaks for the 1%, for the 10 biggest corporations, believing that this wealth is going to come to them, and that it's their own laziness, their own lack of fortitude, that is the reason that they remain in poverty. And it really broke my heart, you know, not only seeing this in my community, but in my own family as well. And I was very motivated to kind of draw back that curtain, both from like a personal standpoint, using my story and my family's story, but then also from like an academic perspective, showing how a lot of these social and economic mechanisms are used to manipulate people. And I kind of look at, you know, 1925 to 2025, you know, to see how these things have been playing out again and again and again, how these generations have been stripped of their economic momentum. But the section I'm going to read from the book is actually about horror movies. Yeah, is anyone a fan of horror movies here? You know, I saw so many parallels between the horror movies that I grew up with and the aesthetics and the narratives that I was immersed in as a kid. I've actually lost my place in this book. I had it dog-eared the last event I did. So you'll have to be patient with me while I flip through the table of contents to locate it.
You want us to sing 76 trombones while you're kidding.
Did anyone see the Simpsons episode that's a parody of The Music Man? Marge versus the Monorail? It's one of Conan O'Brien's episodes. He was the writer of the show, and he's obsessed with The Music Man. So yeah, in this book I have like all these interludes that take us back to the present day, and you know, kind of chronicle my time in Mason City writing and researching this book. And this one is called God-Fearing Child. As I stare into the wide, unblinking eyes of a goat marionette puppet, I wonder if I'm addicted to fear. It's a rainy, sunny afternoon, and I'm standing in the McNider Art Museum, housed in a spooky old mansion in downtown Mason City. It's tucked away in a quiet, charming corner of the city, surrounded by willow trees, antique street lamps, cobblestone walls, and a plethora of Frank Lloyd Wright architecture. It's one of the last remnants of charm and style in old Mason City. I've taken a break from my research at the library and walked over to this eerie vestige of my childhood. The puppet room of the McNider Museum terrified me as a child, often reminding me of the hallway of heads scene in Return to Oz. And yet I was equally drawn to it. Here you can see the marionettes from The Sound of Music's The Lonely Goat Herd scene, creations of the late Bill Baird, famous Mason City puppeteer, who lived behind glass walls in a dark room on the second floor. Looking at them as an adult, I can't help but think of the modern horror film series Annabelle, wherein a demonic spirit possesses an antique doll not unlike the ones I'm looking at now, film series is one of many based on the lives and work of Ed and Lorraine Warren, a pair of Christian demonologists who rose to fame in the 1970s for their association with the Amityville horror story, as well as the wildly successful Conjuring universe horror film series, which to date has grossed $1.2 billion in box office sales. The real Annabelle doll that inspired the films resides behind glass in the Warrens Occult Museum in Connecticut, a fate not unlike these Sound of Music puppets. Along with William Friedkin's The Exorcist and Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby, the Warrens played a massive role in shaping Christian mythology in 20th century America, possibly more than any actual Christian institution. You may assume that, growing up as an evangelical kid, I was not allowed to watch horror movies. And though my mom did try to maintain this policy, she was eventually so buried by 2 jobs and night school that I was more or less raised by late-night television. Perhaps not unrelatedly, around the same time that I slammed my fist through the porch window, which happened in the previous chapter scene, I began hearing voices. Well, a voice. Not quite an auditory hallucination, but a voice that was clear, loud, and bullying enough to take up all the room inside my head, shutting down all thoughts or actions. Then the voice began appearing in my dreams as an old woman. Her name was Caldonia, and she embodied the classic old hag or witch archetype, weathered face under a black hood, using dark magic to lure children into their lair. This trope of Christian propaganda dates back centuries, used in part to frighten children, but also literally to demonize women of a certain age who'd acquired knowledge about sex, nature, and medicine, and were viewed as a threat to a patriarchal society. The mythology is also associated with sleep paralysis, wherein the old hag sits on your chest and prevents you from moving when you wake from a dream. The condition itself is real, and I had an episode of sleep paralysis around once a week as a kid. Caldonia wouldn't be sitting on my chest, though. She'd be standing over me. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. She'd be giggling to herself, the pupils in her wide eyes made of tiny flames that looked 1,000 miles away. I would groan with disgust when she caressed my skin while reciting my sins, as if she were counting her own money. The more I heard her voice, the more I was convinced that she was a demon that had taken possession of my little body. The films I was watching, like the Amityville Horror and The Exorcist, didn't invent the concepts of demonic possession or supernatural warfare, which is angels and demons surrounding us in an invisible realm, warring for possession of our souls. But they did dramatize and contextualize it for modern audiences. Though they were pieces of entertainment, they were also cemented in a religious context and conviction felt deeply by their creators. In nearly every supernatural horror film, there is inevitably a liberal skeptic character who insists on grounding his worldview in logic and science, unable to accept what is happening around him. This character is likely to be either killed by whatever ghost or demon the movie is centered on, or forced to accept that science and logic can no longer save him, so he must develop some kind of faith beyond the laws of physics. Most of these films exist within a tradition of Christian propaganda extending back to the original Passion plays of the Middle Ages, exhibiting Christ's bloody demise using a variety of instruments of torture, the cross, as the ultimate symbol of Christianity. Epic paintings like Dol Gret and The Garden of Earthly Delights, which depict in vivid detail the gruesome and creative forms of eternal torture awaiting all sinners, played a major role in the conceptions of sin and damnation in the minds of 16th century Europeans. Mainstream horror movies aren't strictly Christian propaganda, but they are often heavily rooted in Christian themes, tropes, and characters, and they would eventually inspire a full circle of pop propaganda when evangelicals began making their own books, films, and songs of supernatural terror, often borrowing from the horror movies initially inspired by Christianity. Before The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, and The Warrens, the concept of witches, ghost hunting, and exorcisms had nearly vanished from most Christian institutions. The Age of Enlightenment of the 17th and 18th centuries had made the barbarism of the Spanish Inquisition and the witch hunts of early modern Europe look like embarrassing chapters of a primitive era. But in the 1970s and 80s, the idea that witches and Satanists toiled in dark corners of American society and evil spirits regularly possessed human bodies, driving them to commit murder against their will, was revived in the American consciousness. Suddenly, the Catholic Church was inundated with requests for exorcisms, which they'd not performed for centuries, and Christians in law enforcement and the media slowly conjured the conspiracy theory known today as the Satanic Panic. Much like during the Inquisition or the witch trials, throughout the 1980s, it was widely believed that a cabal of as many as 1 million devil worshippers had infiltrated schools, daycare centers, Hollywood, police departments, and all levels of government, and were ritualistically raping, murdering, and eating scores of American children. There would be over 12,000 claims of satanic ritual abuse against children, with absolutely zero evidence outside of coerced and leading confessions from children. Today, this sensation has been revived in the form of the QAnon conspiracy theory. Scores of lives were lost to social persecution, suicide, and years of incarceration, not to mention millions of dollars in wasted law enforcement resources. Both the Satanic Bible and the Church of Satan were the creations of Anton LaVey in 1966. He was a showman and satirical trickster who didn't even believe in a literal Satan, let alone worship him. Before this, there had never been a legitimate religious sect worshiping Satan, as it would ultimately just have been another Christian denomination, since the devil doesn't exist outside of this paradigm. Throughout the 70s and 80s, there were certainly a number of paint-huffing metalheads and coked-out pagans engaging in wild shit involving robes, masks, and Aleister Crowley's writings on sex magic, but none of it was ever linked to a larger network of believers with a consistent and coherent theology. Throughout my childhood, I was glued to the TV during news reports and the infamous Geraldo special previously mentioned, which was in a previous chapter. Did anyone see that in '88? Geraldo's big exposing Satan's underground special, alleging that these evil and powerful baby eaters surrounded us, and that rock music and drugs were used to lure young people into their dens of iniquity. These reports would be loaded with B-roll footage of Anton LaVey's ceremonies, paintings depicting Dante's Inferno, faces of serial killers like Charles Manson, or random imagery associated with Wiccans or the Masonic Temple. Most common was the pentacle, a star encased in a circle, often misnomered as a pentagram, popularized in the 80s by metal bands like Slayer. This image, at the time referred to as the symbol of Satan by TV sensationalists like Geraldo, is actually historically associated with King Solomon, or various pagan faiths. News reports would show photos of a pentacle spray-painted on the underside of bridges across America, which suggested a unified network of murdering devil worshippers from coast to coast, as opposed to the popularity of Motley Crue's Looks That Kill music video. When hard evidence of these conspiracies failed to materialize, and alleged perpetrators of satanic murder like the West Memphis Three and caretakers at the McMartin preschool were exonerated of their crimes, the Satanic Panic hysteria cooled and became an embarrassing chapter of American criminal justice history. Both in the 1980s and today, evangelical conservatives have tapped into the pop culture paranoia that supernatural evil is all around us, requiring political and spiritual interventions from church leaders. The creators of the 1972 Rapture film, A Thief in the Night, funnily enough, filmed here in Des Moines, were heavily influenced by the cinematic techniques of horror films. The Hell House craze of the 1980s and 90s, Christian haunted houses using fear to proselytize, was clearly inspired by both slasher and horror films, dependent on jump scares and an overabundance of gore. My best friend, Thad, and I often borrowed imagery from films like Tales from the Dark Side and Hellraiser when constructing our makeup, costumes, and performances as demons in church plays and hell houses. And the Christian author Frank Peretti was influenced by Stephen King for his wildly popular evangelical horror series, This Present Darkness. Did anyone read those books? Yeah. They're a good read. Yeah. It's really crazy shit, but it's good structure. Yeah. It's engaging. I reread them a few years ago. In addition to my gluttony for secular horror films, I was immersed in all the macabre media the Christian conservative world had to offer on a nightly basis, shaking like a shitting dog at the idea that I was possessed by a malignant spirit from hell. Most children today might wake from a nightmare and be comforted by their parents with the classic reassurance, that was only a dream, it's not real. But I was taught that such fears were completely justified. That wasn't just your imagination. There really is a monster under your bed. My only defense, I was told, was to pray, fast, and read my Bible. If I were to curse, masturbate, listen to certain music, watch certain movies, or allow unclean thoughts to enter my mind, these goblins would sink their claws deeper into my soul. Today I know that Caledonia was a manifestation of all the fear and shame I'd absorbed at the hands of the Christian right. I now know that witches never really existed, at least not the type of witch I was taught to be on the lookout for. I know that Satanism was also a fictional concept, used to inspire fear of a malevolent other, justifying the prosecution, torture, and execution of anyone engaged in a belief system outside Christianity. I know all of this, and yet, looking into the face of this goat puppet behind the glass of the McNider Museum, thinking about Annabelle in the Warrens Occult Museum, thinking about the incessant visions of Caledonia that made my childhood one long marathon of self-harm and panic attacks, I must admit that the fear is still in me and will likely never leave. After my 2 decades of being pickled in Christian terror, no amount of logic can prevent the hairs on my arms from standing on end, goosebumps from rippling up my spine, my muscles from trembling like scurrying bugs under my skin, whenever I'm confronted with the tropes of supernatural warfare. There's a dopamine release with this surge of fear, and even if it is compulsive and involuntary, it's still a kind of addiction that I wouldn't know how to live without. As an adult, I've written multiple horror novels, hosted creative writing retreats in notoriously haunted hotels, gorged myself on Stephen King books, and watched a scary movie almost every night before bed. I no longer believe, but I still feel the fear, horrible and wonderful as it is. As a freelance journalist, I am fueled by fear of poverty, of missed deadlines, of the dying out of my career or talent, and find it difficult to be productive without having a panic attack driving my ass into gear. I suffer from an overactive nervous system, ramped up when my trauma is triggered, which I then monetize into the form of wild sentences, and hence us being here in this very moment. My relationships, both personal and professional, are often mired in conflict. My therapist has wondered if I suffer from chaos addiction, whereby children reared on adrenaline will unconsciously pursue drama as adults because it's the only relational dynamic they're equipped to navigate. Fear is quite possibly the most powerful tool for social control in human history, It can be used to justify war, to get people to vote for or against a political candidate, or to invest in a boys' marching band before a pool table corrupts their souls. This is why media outlets that frighten are more popular than those that inform, and why churches that preach hate and division are so much more popular than those that preach love and tolerance. I may no longer believe in any of it, but I still experience the fear of a believer, and am quite likely addicted to it. Yeah, I'm hanging out for a bit. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah? Well, yeah, that's fine. Yes.
Okay.
We got time
paper,
for
rock,
both.
scissors. So what was, like, if you had to point to a moment where you thought, where the question started, or the analysis, or the unroute, the picking up the rock started for you, was there, what prompted you to take a step back and look at how you were raised and what you were taught?
Yeah. You know, I've met a lot of former believers, and there's a lot of consistencies in their stories, but a lot of them are neurodivergent, and a lot of them have the same kind of path of, as young believers, going really deep into the Bible, theology, history, wanting to know what sin and salvation are, and kind of drilling so deep that they come out the other side as non-believers because they never quite find anything substantive to cool that flashing light of, like, I don't get it. There was the Y2K thing that I talked about earlier, but also prosperity gospel, when I started, hearing our pastor talk about how much he's been blessed with material wealth, and by the age of like 15, 16, 17, was looking around in the congregation. I'm like, well, everyone's still shopping in thrift stores and driving, cars that are on their last leg and on food stamps. Like, after a decade or so, it didn't seem to be working out too well. But I think the biggest thing was learning about how the Bible was written, assembled, edited, transcribed, that there were thousands of authors over thousands of years, and thousands of different types of Bible, even in contemporary society. There's this historian, Bart Ehrman, whose books I really love, and I got into the Great Courses series at the library, which was more or less my college experience, where you can get these lectures from Ivy League universities, and listen to so many of his about Christian history, learning that there were all these different tribes of Christianity that were kind of lost to history, and it was the Apostle Paul that kind of won the day, but that there was more diversity of thought in the first year of Christianity than there are today. And today there are 40,000 different types of Christianity. And I remember learning that as a young person and asking myself a question like, oh, but I happen to land in the one true one because I was born to this family at this time, who go to this church at the north end of Clear Lake, and those other churches in Clear Lake even don't have it right. But I was just lucky that I got the right one without having anything to do with it. So all of those things kind of came together, and I often say, like, I never really rebelled from these institutions. I never wanted to lose my faith. It kind of like slipped through my fingers because I just couldn't hold on to it with all this new information. Like, I was traveling, I was reading books, I was meeting people of different faiths and different backgrounds, and I was like, I just don't have anything to keep me grounded in this belief. And yeah, then ended up going in the other direction and being like one of those really obnoxious new atheists in the 2000s, the Bill Maher, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins type, and I've since kind of, become a lot more tolerant, and, and realizing within Christianity there's so much diversity. Like, some of the greatest social movements in American history, the abolitionist movement, women's suffrage, the civil rights movement, these were all the Christian left, so we do have this very storied history in America of Christianity being a force for good. Sorry, that was a really long-winded way of answering your question.
I was following it. So great.
Yeah.
So, how are things with your family now? Are your parents still living, or siblings, or?
Yeah, pretty good. They've read sections of the book. There were things that I needed them to read before it was published, just to know that I got it right, because my parents play a large role in this, like, not just as my parents, but like I talk about their childhoods and their teenage years and their early days as parents. They had 3 kids before they were 21, and I, have like scenes with their inner monologue and their emotions about each other. And I was like, I'd done, probably 8 hours of interviews each with the 2 of them separately, and so I had a lot to work with. But I was like, am I taking too many liberties here? Was this what it was like for you? But they haven't read all of it, I don't think, and there are things about my childhood that I've never talked to them about, things that were very disturbing, that the book's been out now for like a week and a half, and it's weird that like so many strangers out there in the world know about these things, but I don't think my parents have read it. But we're close. I go home twice a year. Me and my dad are really close. We talk on the phone pretty regularly, and I'm as close with my siblings now as I ever have been, which doesn't really say much.
Are they still? Have they evolved in their thinking about religion, or
They have. I think they would all still identify as believers, as Christians, but I think like anyone else, their opinions are very different than they were at 25. They no longer believe the world's going to end in 1988. If you say that. Yeah, and that's probably all I should say about that. Yeah. Matt, back there.
Since it plays an important part in your book, do you have a favorite line or song from The Music Man?
Oh, don't make me choose. Yeah, I was obsessed with that musical even as a kid, because I mean it's just a banger of songs, one after the other. P is for Pool, I think, is the most memorable song in there, and Robert Preston's greatest performance. One of the things that always, I don't know if I'd characterize it as my favorite line, but one of the most intriguing was when he's talking about what's going to happen when this pool table comes to town. Like, your sons are going to be gamblers, your daughters are going to be whores. I mean, that's not verbatim, but like, he has this like low-key racism in one line where he's talking about them going out to the dance at the Armory, and he says, libertine men and scarlet women and ragtime, shameless music that'll grab your son, and he emphasizes your daughter with the arms of a jungle animal instinct, mass hysteria, so talking about this jazz music and the arms of a jungle animal around your daughter, like it's very lightly coded. You don't have to dig too deep into that, but yeah, like that's very much like what the Klan 2.0 in the 20s were doing, and then later on Nixon with the Southern strategy. But like, the Klan in the 19th century were very overtly racist, and they didn't have any kind of like marketing finesse. But in the 20s, it was all about like, booze and drugs and people who weren't Christians, who weren't like us. Like, they weren't so like directly racist. They were a racist institution. They were doing lynchings. They were a violent domestic terrorist operation. But they knew how to kind of like subtly work these things in, so they could kind of rope a lot of people who maybe didn't have those like overtly racist tendencies to be like, well, yeah, we got to protect our daughters from these undesirables coming to town, these jazz music folks. So yeah, anyone who hasn't seen The Music Man, I highly encourage it because it's just a fantastic movie. Yeah.
So I'm curious, you weave together so many things, right? Like the historical, the personal, the religious, the political. What was your process like for writing this book? Like, I mean, obviously it involved a lot of research, but I'm also just kind of curious how those concepts came together for you.
Yeah, it was arduous. It was 4 years, 9 drafts. Some of those drafts were like 800-900 pages because I just get excited about like, oh, I want to learn about the economics of agriculture, and then I want to learn about the history of agriculture, and then I want to learn about the difference between Native Americans and the pioneers and their approach to agriculture and soil erosion and and just going down these rabbit holes, and then I'd have like a 30-page essay in there that my editor's like, shrink this down or cut it entirely. I mean, it really started with the conversation between me and my agent, where I was talking about how I had 45 low-wage jobs throughout my 20s and teens, and she's like, well, how did that happen? And I was like, well, I flunked out of high school. And she's like, oh, well, how did that happen? I was like, well, I was preparing for the end of the world. I didn't have time for math. And then we just kind of kept talking, and we eventually came around to this idea of weaving in economics, mental health, and religion and politics, and then also doing a memoir. So trying to blend memoir and journalism. And it took forever. It's kind of like if you ever do a Rubik's Cube, where you're like, oh, I need this piece to go over here, but then when I do that, this piece here moves over there, and that's no good. Like, so you got to like think about all of these different elements and how to like shape them and what needs to be cut and what needs to stay. Yeah, I'm so glad it's over. Any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned your therapist. Can you talk a little bit about how you got into therapy? Are you still in therapy?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of therapy. I do it twice a week. And EMDR therapy in particular was very helpful, where you revisit traumatic events, but with these kind of sensory inputs that allow you to not go to the level of like adrenaline and cortisol that kind of prevents the processing of memories, which is basically what trauma is. It's a memory that gets stuck somewhere. You have an emotional reaction to it, but you can't really like cognitively understand it. And we talk a great deal about religious trauma syndrome and how it stays with you. Like I said in that essay, I don't cognitively fear demons, infiltrating my thoughts or my bedroom, but my body does. I sleep with the electric candles in my room. I'm uncomfortable in the dark. So, therapy, I always say, like, it doesn't get rid of your problems, but it turns down the volume on them and gives you some tools to manage them. And I've kind of made friends with my fear. When it arrives, I notice it, I say hello to it, and that allows it to just kind of move along. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you have an event like this in Mason City or Clear Lake?
My publicist really wanted me to.
I can see where it'd be. Ooh,
There's a great bookstore up there that I would have loved
it could
to.
happen.
It could. I struggled with a lot of feelings about exploiting my family and friends, and I write about it at the end of the book, where I'm asking myself, like, am I the music man that's come to town that's, manipulating these people for my career, for my financial success, and never really settled on a conclusion about that. It's still kind of, on my mind, and changed the names of everyone in my hometown that's in the book. Historical figures, obviously, Jerry Falwell, Reagan, they're named appropriately, but changed the descriptions of a lot of people, what part of town they live in, because there's a lot of really personal stories. You know, I spent years as a journalist interviewing, you know, like politicians or like someone's in a band and they release an album. Those people want to talk to journalists. You know, they're signing up for it. It's part of the job. My family didn't sign up for this job, and they were very gracious to give me all these interviews and being so vulnerable and honest. I hope they don't regret it, and I hope I portrayed them with compassion. But, you know, to answer your question, like doing an event in my hometown and say like doing local media in my hometown, I just didn't really want to like point a lot of arrows like right at my family.
This might be close enough.
Yeah, it really is. And what one of the things that's just absolutely gut wrenching is there's a character in the book who was my best friend growing up, you know, really since like kindergarten, and he had a lot of fears about me writing about him in this book. He lived a very, you know, wild and debauched life and was feeling a lot of shame about it. And in the end of the book, we get in a fight and don't speak again. And I know that he was worried about this book coming out, and I had written about him with the idea in mind that he would read it and he would know that I was expressing, you know, a lot of love for him and portrayed him with a lot of compassion and care. And then I find out the day the book was released that he had just died. And I to this day don't know why, like if it was a drug overdose or suicide, or if it had anything to do with my book. Maybe not. Maybe it was just a coincidence that it happened right before the book came out. But that was really hard for me to deal with, and remains so. I am glad a lot of the feedback I've gotten from people is that, you know, my family and other characters are portrayed in a very compassionate and nuanced way. And, like, there aren't any villains in this book other than maybe Jerry Falwell.
There.
Yeah. Because, you know, I'd like to think that it's an ideal of mine, and I don't have many, that everyone is worthy of compassion, you know, even people that do horrible things. I'm often asked, like, do you think your pastor or other evangelists were, you know, not knowingly manipulating people and laughing their way to the bank and saying, like, what rubes that they buy all this? And I don't know what was in their minds or hearts, but I have to think about that Upton Sinclair line. It's very difficult to get a man to understand something if his paycheck depends on him not understanding it. And in The Music Man, there's a scene towards the end where Harold Hill admits that it was a con, and he's telling Winthrop, the young Ron Howard, like, but I still think you're a great kid, and that's why I wanted you in the band. And he says to him, what band? And Hill says, I always believe there's a band. So he's like, you know, fooling himself as well as everyone else. He's buying into it. So I don't necessarily know or believe that any of these preachers are knowingly swindling people. I mean, I think they believe it too. Any question? Yeah.
So what's next?
Oh, that's a great question. My agent really wants me to write about satanic panic, which I'd love to as well. It'd be fun to write about crimes that never actually happened instead of horrifying things that did happen. I am all in on that, but what's been on my mind that has absolutely nothing to do with this topic is the 15-minute city. The idea that you can have cities designed to be pedestrian friendly and not centered around cars, and that this can be an antidote for so many of society's problems, health, mental health, economics, and that so many of our cities were designed this way, and so many of our problems came about when we started structuring our communities around cars. But yeah, that's a completely left field.
That would be a good thing for rural Iowa, wouldn't it?
Well, I think in rural areas you do need cars, but like if I live in Denver, in a part of Denver that is pedestrian friendly, and I haven't owned a car in 20 years. I can walk everywhere. I can carry my groceries home, and my life is infinitely better on so many levels because I don't have to rely on a car.
Wow.
But I know you guys didn't come here to talk about that.
All right.
Any other questions? All right.
Okay,
Well,
I think we're gonna have some books to sign.
Yeah. Thanks for coming out, everybody.
Yeah.